Good evening and welcome back to Revelation chapter 14. We're probably going to be sort of brief this evening. A couple of things. Lunch did not settle well and a lot of lack of sleep this week. We don't want to get to where I'm doing nothing but rambling, which somebody's probably saying, yeah, like that's not going to happen. So I say we're going to be brief, which means, it'll be probably 8:30 the next time I look at a clock, but at any rate, we're gonna see how this goes. Revelation chapter 14, and we're gonna move on and go to verse 6 and read through this upcoming section here. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water." And another angel followed, saying, "Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night, and who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Write, Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them." Right, there are going to be several places here where we just go, okay, that translation is weak or is caving into simplicity rather than dealing honestly with the subject matter of the text. And that's going to be something that we end up with not only in our leftmost column, the New King James Version, but in our fourth column, the Evangelical Heritage Version as well. And let me just glance at this for a second as well. And that is going to be one of the things that's funny about this, and we'll get into it when we get there, is the unmixed wine. Everybody kind of shies away from translating it the way that it is. It's mixed, unmixed, and getting into what that means. And it becomes, instead of trying to figure out a phrase to make it make sense, they just kind of punt at that point instead. Yeah. Oh, weird. That one even goes faithfulness instead of faith. Okay. When we get there. When we look at chapter 14, verse 6, this is a verse that Bugenhagen, Johannes Bugenhagen, the pastor of the church there in Wittenberg, used for the funeral of Martin Luther. And he said, okay, here's not a matter of, look, here's Luther, the answer to prophecy, but rather, here's an example that in Luther we see this very thing taking place. That in the middle of this world of trial and tribulation and this world of opposition to the gospel, here we have the everlasting gospel, nevertheless, returning and being preached because it's the everlasting gospel. I mean, that's really it. It's every time it seems like it's been triumphed over by the world, nonetheless, here we find that it still does that which it is to do. that it is still bringing people to Christ, giving them the forgiveness of sins and everlasting life, and allowing them or strengthening them to endure all the things that the devil, the world, and this flesh bring against them. And again, that's something absolutely crucial for us today, where we see the world entering another set of dark ages, as it were. And we need to be clear on that too. The dark ages were not all that dark compared to more recent times. In this regard, there were a lot of things that were lost, things that educationally or historically were no longer prominent. The culture of earlier civilizations that had been advanced was quite often not that held up or respected or taught in some of the lands that we have, thought of as enlightened, say Europe. Things that, for instance, just weren't there until the Renaissance, like Greek philosophy and culture, and the prominent study of the original manuscripts of the Old and New Testaments. It's why we don't end up with the preservation of Hebrew manuscripts that we should have had, as we did with Greek manuscripts, and why even where there was preservation of manuscripts, they often weren't able to be read. Education was by no means universal, and even within the church, not all the pastors were educated the way they needed to be. And that's why Luther, when we have the Saxon Visitation, finds such misery and darkness that you've got those who are pastors of congregations not knowing the Lord's Prayer, much less knowing what it means. Again, part of that too is stems from the keeping of control over certain things. You will worship in Latin, in spite of the fact that you don't know Latin. So there would be a class separation. Those who were able to go to school and learn Latin, those who did not. And yet, whether you knew it or not, that's what your worship would be in. So when it came down to people changing the teaching of God's Word, it's a lot easier to do if you not only don't understand the language that the word was written in originally, but don't understand the way that it's written when it's being spoken to you. Or again, that you're singing and confessing something and having no great clue what it is, or getting just folk translation of things. And, again, when you get to the Renaissance, then all of a sudden you've got them bringing back again ancient Greek texts, ancient Latin texts. You've got the study of Hebrew starting to rise up among Christians again. Melanchthon's father-in-law being one of the primary ones bringing that to the fore, and Melanchthon himself being one of the first ones, learning the language, as Luther then did as well. And of course, as we've mentioned before, one of the bad things about that is when something like that gets restored, you start making some automatic conclusions. Oh, look, I've got the Hebrew text now. That's better than the Greek text. Let me go on. Instead of, I have a Hebrew text now, but the text I'm reading was not being preserved by the Christians and was not 1,000 or 1,500 years old, but 400 years old. All of a sudden you end up realizing that, the Greek text of the Old Testament is actually older. Now, does older necessarily mean better? No. But it was used consistently in the writings within the church, so it had authority. Then again, not all by any means, but a good chunk of the quotes of the Old Testament in the New Testament are from the Septuagint rather than from the Hebrew text. And of course, you end up with the typical thing of theologians warring against each other on this, and none of them getting it right. The getting it right is to say the way that you do theology properly is not to say, oh, look, the Hebrew text agrees with our theology, let me go on with the Hebrew text. Or the Greek text agrees with our theology, therefore I will take the Greek text. You take whatever is most opposed to you, and then you say, oh, but nonetheless, in spite of this text being perhaps the right one, still we get the correct meaning in the New Testament. Again, it's that principle of, and the principle that you find in Jesus and in the apostles. They didn't just say, okay, look, the Jews who were already falling away from the proper message of the coming Messiah translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, and they already had biases that show up. Therefore, we're not going to use the Greek. No. They said, we'll take what they've done and their biases, and we'll use them, and we'll still show the truth. Put another way, if you really know your position, you do the Rush Limbaugh thing, and you fight with one arm tied behind your back just to make it fair. That's what Jesus and the apostles often did. Again, when we come up to something like the word law in the New Testament, nomos in Greek, as a translation for Torah, teaching in Hebrew. Well, we could simply say, well, anytime it says law, nomos, it's wrong. Well, except for the fact that in the New Testament it got used that way because the New Testament writers were not necessarily saying, oh, look, the Jews who translated the Septuagint did it right, but rather, let's make our point without saying, oh, no, you've got to translate it this way to make the point. Well, that again comes up here in this chapter. There are things that the translation is weak, but we can still make our point with the translation as it is. It's why we don't say, hey, look, the New King James Version has some errors in it, or the Evangelical Heritage Version has some places where it's not translated right. Therefore, we've got to make a whole new translation to fix this. No, first of all, we have our pastors trained in the languages so that they can make note of these things. And second, we don't say, look, if there's a mistranslation in this verse or another, unless it's absolutely egregious to the point of being intentional, Jehovah's Witness Bible on John 1:1 or something like that, we can still get the right meaning out of a Bible that isn't perfect in its translation. Again, one of the things that we have noted several times with more recent translations being done as they typically are by Calvinists or Arminians, they love to stick with the word covenant all the way throughout. And part of that among the Calvinists is because that's a particular emphasis in their theology, especially certain forms of Calvinist theology, such as that known as federalism. And in that theology, they make it to where faith is your keeping of the contract with God. You've got to keep the covenant by faith, and that becomes the you've done your bit. Now, if you take it as you've done your bit, that's where we end up with, say, Church of Christ. Because Church of Christ wants to say, oh, no, we don't do works of the law. We do works, but they're not of the law. They're the works that Christians do, the works of faith. They're obeying the gospel and just having this perverted use of language. Well, what you end up with then is, again, a gross misunderstanding of things that can seem perfectly reasonable. It's why federalism in the hands of the Calvinists the obeying the gospel of the Church of Christ and the works righteousness of Rome. But oh no, not the doing of the ceremonial law, are doing works of charity. All of them are the same package. And they're all by misunderstanding of God's word. In looking at that, part of that we can see already in what's said by the angel flying in the midst of the heaven. He has the everlasting gospel to preach, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God." There's gospel for you. Be afraid of God. But wait a second. That's not all that fear God can mean, right? Psalm 130, "But there is forgiveness with thee, that thou mayest be feared." Again, we typically note with the fear of God that there are two ways to say this in Hebrew. We have fear min Yahweh and fear eth Yahweh. Fear min Yahweh is to be afraid from the Lord. The Lord makes you afraid, and you run away. Fear eth Yahweh, we typically simply translate as fear of the Lord, or fearing the Lord. That eth is a marker of a definite, direct object. Fear the Lord. That's who we are to fear. But when it's not the min construction, but the eth construction, it's not to be afraid of and run away from, but it's to have this right fear in which we say, oh no, wait, I just did something to destroy my relationship with you. Let me fix that. Or let me come to you so you can fix that. The fear of the Lord in the proper sense, what we typically have called in explanations of the Catechism, filial fear, the fear a son has. Right? A son, a child, an heir is not supposed to be afraid of the parents so that they run away and run away from home because, after all, their parents want them dead. No, that's servile fear. That's the fear a slave has. A slave who has been disobedient and knows that under the law they can be beaten or put to death. An heir, instead, runs to the parent saying, I'm sorry. If for no other reason than, don't write me out of your will, please. The slave is not in the will. So the slave might run away, try to escape what he's done wrong. The heir returns so that he might receive forgiveness and restoration. The everlasting gospel is to fear God in that way, the Psalm 130 way, to give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heaven and earth, the sea, and, oh, by the way, springs of water. Now, why do I say it like that? Because of the difference between springs of water and the sea. Okay, the sea, you're not supposed to drink seawater, at least not with a proper desalination rig, right? Because drinking salt water will make you sick and kill you. Springs of water, that's safe water to drink, and generally speaking, safe water to deal with. Seawater, that is to say, the sea itself, it churns and has shipwrecks taking place on it and so on. One of the interesting things is the people who have died recently in the sea who were or had been professional athletes or others who were known to be in good shape. We think of Ryan Mallett, who had been quarterback for University of Arkansas and then pro football as well. Super Bowl ring with the Patriots. Not that he actually played that year, but he has the ring, right? He may have backed up in a game or two, but nonetheless, unlike me, he had a multi-year career as a quarterback in the NFL. And, of course, had to be in game shape all along. Actually started some games and so on. Went swimming and died. One of his, I think, teammates, or he may have been a year or two off, was on the cover of Madden football for, I don't know, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever, Peyton Hillis. Peyton Hillis was a running back. He was almost fullback size, but a little bit quicker, so he kind of played halfback. He was behind Darren McFadden and Felix Jones. And he also played some pro football. Also got pulled under swimming. He survived, but I think there was some extensive rehab that had to be done because of all of that. Okay, the point being, the sea, or in their case, the Gulf of Mexico even, has enough waves, undertow, and all of those things to be a dangerous place. Again, you don't have to be in the ocean itself, but being in the Gulf, you can get attacked by a shark, right? I mean, there are dangerous things there. Okay, worship him who created the heaven and the earth and the sea, but also springs of water. He made deadly water, which wouldn't have been deadly were it not for man's fall. And he also made safe water. He made this water that you can drink, this water that you can bathe with, and so on. And so it becomes an illustration of, in the middle of all of these things that might seem deadly or oppressive or simply rooted in law, here we have the message of the everlasting gospel, that all of those things have a good way to be seen as well. What's the good way to see the demands of the law? Not, obviously, in our thinking, I've got to keep them to be saved, but in seeing Jesus keep them. Now, that's going to come up in a few verses again, right? You already know where. But the idea, then, that here is the everlasting gospel to be preached to those who dwell on the earth, to the four again, every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. This is the message for everyone. Have the right fear of God. The hour of his judgment has come. You can fear him that he's going to destroy you because you've been evil. Or you can fear him that he has forgiveness for you so that you can be saved. And therefore, instead of running away from him, run to him that your relationship with him might be the right one. How? Worship him. What is worshiping? Again, in that word in English, we have the matter of assignation of worth. Worshiping is to say, you are worthy. I find worth in you. You are indeed the source of all worth. And what does that mean? That's where my worth is. That's where everything I can have is. And he desires to give it to me. Therefore, to worship him is to assign to him the greatest worth and see that that's where we get everything worthwhile from, which is to say, to look to him as the source of all good. Where do we find that again? You know, once again, what does Luther say it means to have a God? In the beginning of his discussion of the first commandment, what does he say but exactly that? That which is a God is that thing to which you look for all good. The right faith is that which has the right God. But any faith that you have, whatever you look to be the source of good for you, that is your God. So instead, have the right God. And so that's what's being said here once again. Worship the true God. Fear him with whom there is forgiveness. Run to him because he grants you forgiveness and saves you. He is the one who is patient, long of nose, as the Hebrew expression is, doesn't have a bull's nose that flares easily and, snorts up all the dust and is about to charge down and gore you. No, his desire is not for the death of the sinner, but that the sinner might be turned from his way and live. That God, fear him, have the right fear of him, the fear that goes to him to receive that forgiveness. Again, if it were just us, just Lutherans or even just Christians saying that that's what's going on here, we might be a bit suspect. Oh, no, you're not understanding it at all right. But it's what Psalm 130 says. It's why the De Profundis is one of those psalms that was, set to music even in hymnals without the psalms being set to music. Even when chanting was being looked away from, still Psalm 130 is going to be there in your hymnal. Obviously, it's in the Lutheran hymnal exactly that way, even though they were saving paper by not setting chant tones to everything. Still, that one was regarded as special. You've got to be able to have Psalm 130. When you look at the suffrages, what do you find but that Psalm 130 is one of the two psalms that you have in the suffrages? So it was to be used constantly so that would be part of who you are as a Christian, one who understands that concept. Lord, if you should mark iniquities, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that you can be properly feared. Again, properly feared. To understand the Lord God Almighty is the God who has designed everything to be your Father. The one who has done everything for you. Not only created you in his image and gave you the Garden of Eden, but because your first parents did away with that, sent forth his own Son to suffer what you have deserved because of your sin and to fulfill all righteousness so that you can be seen as righteous. Obviously, if you see yourself at all out of a relationship with that, you should run toward it. That's the fear eth Yahweh, the fear of the Lord, properly speaking. To see that the one who can command the waves on the sea is the one who also provided you springs of water so that you don't have to go out into the sea, gather some water in spite of the undertow and the sharks, and bring that water back, go through a desalination process so that you can drink it. No, he puts some water where you can get it without having to go through all that. That's God who has loved you and not given you over to all that you deserve even in this life. Okay. There we go. I'm sorry, I had to look at my clock there because it's like, wait a second, what is it? And it was still saying it was a minute to 6, but no, it is 6:30. All right. That's the first angel. And again, Bugenhagen says this is what Luther's doing. He's showing you what the proper fear of the Lord is, by seeing that it's not a matter of our works that we approach him, it's by his forgiveness that we approach him. That, as Melanchthon put in the Augsburg Confession and its apology, what the real, true, genuine, proper worship of God is to have faith in him, to assign him all worth, and as the source of any worth for us, purely by his grace for Jesus' sake. Faith in him. That's it. And as Bugenhagen would lay Luther's body to rest, that's what needed to be understood. about what the Reformation message is. Now, this angel then is giving us a preview of what's to come based on what we've just seen. We saw the beast from the sea, the beast from the land, the 144,000. And now here's how this is all going to play out. The everlasting gospel keeps going forth, preparing people for the hour of his judgment. And then we have the fall of the apostate church and all the anti-Christian power. And we'll see that all playing out. The great city has fallen. She made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. That is, the drink of the wrath that comes to those who participate in her fornication. The, what do you call it, due reward, I guess, would be the way to say it, in the retribution for what they've done. And we'll see that elaborated on coming up in the next few chapters. But it's not dwelt on right here, so we won't dwell on it right now either. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation." Evangelical Heritage Version says, he will also drink from the wine of God's wrath, which has been poured undiluted into the cup of his anger, and will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. Again, it's interesting that what they're doing is they're taking the verb that means mixed and using it for poured. And the next word after that verb for mixed is unmixed. So, and he shall drink from the wine of the wrath of God, the mixed, unmixed, in the cup of his anger. Right, so it's a little play on words, which we miss then in English, but it's to make it more absolute in the purity, right? He's mixing it completely unmixed. Therefore, it's full strength, undiluted wrath of God. That's what happens when you sell out Jesus in order to make nice with the world. It doesn't mean to be belligerent to the world, or just be hateful to people who are not yet believers, because it could be that God is going to bring them to faith in him. But it means that we don't give up the confession of Christ in order to have worldly things, to secure our place here. What does Jesus say? The one who loves his life will lose it, but the one who loses his life for my sake, he will have it. Right? Again, that sort of understanding of undiluted wrath then toward those who would deny Christ is exactly what Jesus also said. The one who confesses him before men, he will confess before the Father in heaven. The one who denies him before men, he will deny him before his Father in heaven. And then such shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. notice the way that that's saying it as well. Those who worship the beast and his image, not those who worshipped, not past, but those, while they're doing it, they have no real rest. Well, they might have peace with the world, but what does peace with the world mean? Is it everlasting peace? Sure doesn't seem like it. Consider something like Iran. Well, if we get rid of the Shah, we'll have peace. And then the Ayatollah Khomeini comes up and causes them more problems, right? He is repressive in his regime. He stupidly imprisons Americans and has to give them up because he's afraid, finally, that he'll be destroyed. Well, things go on, and they keep doing the sort of things that they do. They claim they'll never have a nuclear program, but they give signs that they're going to have one, and so they end up having to be bombed repeatedly. And so we have that sort of thing. Well, what happens there? Oh, no, we're not going to do anything. Is there peace there? No. Still tension. You look at those who gain all sorts of worldly things. Do they have peace? Not if they don't have Christ. Again, when you ask people who most of us would consider rich, whether or not they're rich, oh, no, this other guy's rich. Which is to say, if I don't have as much as he does, I really am not secure. People who aren't secure in Christ are not secure at all. Their torment is upcoming. And whether they have a full sense of it or not, they know that they can receive some torment in this life as well. One of the things that's always fascinating is the matter of the Nazis stealing great works of art. And you think, okay, well, that's a crime, right? Sure, fine. Some of that art gets bought by people later, and they don't want to think about the Nazis having stolen it. Oh, no, I paid for it, therefore it's mine, and that sort of, rationalizing. But all of that aside, that was owned by people, or by governments, or by museums, or whatever it might be, and was stolen. So however many millions of dollars such and such painting might be worth, it can always be stolen again. Or, if not stolen outright, confiscated by a government. Because anything that is still within the power and authority of men can be corrupted and turned against us. That being the case, if we trust in our works of art, if we trust in our businesses, businesses can be commandeered by the government and made to be governmental agencies instead too. Again, Germany, Soviet Union, any number of dictatorships. It happens over and over. If you trust in those things, how will you have rest day or night? And having not rest, here the book of Revelation is telling us, understand that that's why you will not have rest now, is because you will not have rest for all eternity. But for those of us who have the Lamb, this is the patience of the saints. Right? That's our patience. And again, an abysmal translation in the Evangelical Heritage Version. Here we see verse 12. Here, patient endurance is needed by the saints who hold on to the commands of God and their faith in Jesus. It's like, that's just not what's going on there at all. There is absolutely nothing within that translation that makes any great sense. Literally, here, the patience of the saints is. The keepers of the commandments are those keeping the commandments of God. Kai, the faith of Jesus. There's no verb that says calls for or anything like that. Doesn't say it's needed by. There's no verb for that. It says is. So what they're getting at, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. As far as I can recall, this last column's translation, which I would expect to be a little bit more loose that way, even it isn't. Okay, where did it go? Oh, they go with this calls for the perseverance of the holy ones. Those who keep God's commandments and continue the faithfulness of Jesus. I'm sorry, is that as ultimately works righteous as you could possibly get? Absolutely. And it also has no basis in what's actually written there. That's just really strange. Just really strange. When we look at that last little chunk, and we'll come back to this next week and do a little bit more with it as well, but that last little chunk of this, here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And when I was reading it before, I said, Kai, the faith of Jesus. Because we have to remember that Kai is the Greek word that often means and, but doesn't always mean and. Here, is it really two things? Or is it one? What is the keeping of the commandments of God that you can do? Is it your obedience? Well, if it's a matter of, here's the patience of those who really keep the commandments of God correctly, then nobody has patience or endurance because none of us keep it correctly. But how are the commandments of God kept correctly? Only by Jesus. And therefore by us, through faith in Jesus, who has fulfilled all righteousness for us. Well, that is to say, faith in the content about Jesus. And so we get that thing that we've mentioned before of the word faith being used in two ways. Well, being used for two things and in three ways, we might say. This word faithfulness in the far right column, that's not bad. It can mean that, but that's sort of the last meaning of this word that gets used. And when it is, you would have to translate the rest of it the right way. Those keeping the commandments of God, even or and, the faithfulness of Jesus, which is to say, those keeping the faithfulness of Jesus, which kept the commandments of God, so that they are the keepers of the commandments of God. If that were translated to mean it that way, that would be okay. But here simply, those keeping the commandments of God, even the faith of Jesus. That is to say, those who keep the content which is about Jesus. This is the distinction between fides qua creditur, faith which believes, and fides quae creditur, faith which is believed. In the Epistle of St. Jude, we see the fides quae creditur, the faith handed down to the saints. It's not like you inherited somebody else's belief or you inherited somebody else's believing, but rather the doctrine that is to be believed that's handed down to the saints. the content, the object of faith, the object of belief can be called faith. Fides quae. Right? Here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who are keepers of the commandments of God, even by the keeping of what Jesus has done. Right? Here's your patience if you are one who has that. Those who have the opposite of that, they go to destruction. Are they keeping you from being as successful as you could be in business right now? Sure, they might be. But you know what? They will go away. They go to destruction. You go to life. So there's the thing that gives you patience. And that's, again, what we have here with this word is. Here is the patience. Here is the thing that gives you patience. If you want to say it requires patience or patient endurance, well, if it does, it also gives it to you. It's not requiring you to come up with something on your own. It's giving you that which gives you patient endurance, the assurance of what happens to them as opposed to what happens to you. That's there whether we translate the chi correctly or not. I was going to say a good example of this is probably Lenski's translation of it. So I'm going to scroll to it. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a great voice, if anyone does obeisance to the beast and his image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also shall drink from the wine of the anger of God, served unmixed in the cup of his wrath. And he shall be tormented in fire and brimstone before holy angels and before the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up from the eons of the eons. And they have no respite by day or by night, those doing obeisance to the beast and to his image, and if anyone receives the mark of his name. The next verse. Got to scroll through a couple pages. Here is the endurance of the saints, those keeping the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Right? And he comments on his translation this way. As in chapter 2, verse 2 and elsewhere, patience equals the brave endurance which holds out under afflictions. It is thus a word that is never used with reference to God. The thought of what awaits the adorers of the beast will furnish endurance for the saints when the beast is conquering them, when the tyranny of the second beast strikes them. As saints who are set apart wholly for God, they will think of the fate of all the worshippers of the beast and will bravely hold out. The apposition of the keepers is not irregular, but it's more to be specific. The more so since the anti-Christians are designated in the same way, the worshippers of the beast. All right. What does this mean, apposition? It's when you put two words right next to each other, and the second one explains the first one. And so that's what he's saying. Here is the patience of the saints, and then the next here is, this is the explanation of who the saints are. Those who are the keepers of the commandments of God, even the faith of Christ. Because he continues then saying, the followers of the beast and the followers of God are direct opposites. The latter keep God's commandments, keep them as treasures. Let no one tamper with them. These precious commandments, which express his saving will in his word, both gospel and law. Quote, and the faith of Jesus, end quote, is explicative. For this faith and God's commandments are the same. The faith, singular, summarizing, the commandments, plural, spreading out in detail. Those keeping the commandments of God and having the testimony of Jesus in 12:17 is the same. The faith is objective, fides quae creditur, and not subjective, fides qua creditur. The subjective idea lies in the participle keeping. They keep, they treasure the faith in the sense of the doctrine which originates from Jesus. Right? The same way that they keep the commandments of God. They treasure the commandments because they know they're right, even when they can't physically do them the correct way in word and deed and thought because of the flesh that still clings to us. So the keeping has to do with treasuring, has to do with admitting, as Paul does, I know that the law is right. I just see another law at work within the members of my body. I agree the law is good, but me, no. I don't do the thing that I want to do, but end up doing the thing I don't want to do, he says. Nonetheless, the law is good. Right, so that's what's going on here then. Here's patience. When you see them coming against you, preventing you from doing the things that are good and necessary for life, and so on, persevere because you know that their end is destruction and your end is salvation. That's what gives you the patient endurance to continue to go on. All right, that's where we're going to leave it go. We'll pick it up there next time with maybe a few more comments on that, as well as possibly some testimony from the church fathers and a couple other things that go that same way, so that, again, we always want to verify this is not some novel interpretation, and that even when you end up with some of the church fathers going through the book of Revelation and wanting to try to find something to tie things to, just like Tim LaHaye in his Left Behind series does. Oh, no, we've got to have something contemporary with us to tie this to. No, that thought should have never made it out of the first generation of Christians. Because now it's like, no, this is for the entire New Testament era. How do we understand it in that light? Again, the beast continues in this world, and we therefore need to continue to have comfort and strength against him. We need to be comforted and strengthened against all anti-Christian power, all anti-Christian propaganda, against the very Antichrist as well. And that's what this book is designed to do. Not be something to be read with the news magazine as if we're going to tie everything together. But instead, with the understanding that just as Jesus said in Matthew 24, these things happen during the course of the history of the world. But here is God operating through it all. All right, we have online matins on Friday and Saturday at 10. There's an appointment that might delay us a little bit on Friday morning, but I don't think so. And one way or another, we will have that for our Ember week in Lent. And so that's how that is. If anything changes, we'll be emailing the congregation and let you all know. So anyway, our Lord grant you a blessed remainder to your week, and God willing, see you soon.